morning, depending on where you are in the world. So you're very welcome today to this, the fourth in my Top Tips IELTS webinar series. And today we're going to talk about the speaking exam and just a little part of the speaking. So I'm really pleased that you are here today. It shows me that you are very serious about getting the IELTS result that you really want, and that you're giving up your time today to come here and find out a little bit more about the IELTS speaking so that it can help you in your exam when you take it. So congratulations for that and for taking the time to come. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Bernie Wall. I'm an IELTS trainer. I've been training IELTS students for 20 years, mostly at Band 7 and 8, although not exclusively. And I also work a lot with students who've taken the exam a few times, sometimes many times, and haven't got the score that they want. So I train them in the areas that they are finding challenging, and then we get them to the score that they want. I was for 5 years an IELTS examiner myself, so I understand the IELTS exam both from the point of view of the examiner and the student, and obviously also the trainer. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about speaking part 2. Now, speaking part 2 is a quite specific part of the speaking exam, and it's one that you can prepare quite well for, which is why I wanted to talk about it today. Unlike parts 1 and 3, where you don't have any idea of what's going to come, with part 2, if you prepare well, then you should be able to manage with whatever question you get. So I want to talk about how you can prepare, and also a little bit about how you can perform that part of the test in the actual exam so that you maximize the score that you get. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now. Okay, so that we can get the slides up that I've prepared. Okay, so it's the IELTS success system that I've developed, and this is tip 4 in my 5 top IELTS tips, and we're going to look at speaking. So this is the examiner. And from my work with students and talking to students about the examiner, I think a lot of people have this kind of view of the speaking examiner. Maybe not that he's a middle-aged man with a grumpy face, but it's the idea that the examiner is looking for something specific, is scrutinizing what you say, is being quite perhaps not so generous with the points, and there's a certain amount of fear I find when I talk to students around the examiner. Now, I myself was an examiner. I know lots of examiners, and I haven't met very many. There may be 1 or 2, but I haven't met very many who would appear like this in the exam. So I think the truth is something very different. And so there are a few points I want to make about the examiner before we move on to looking at part 2. Examiners want you to do the best you can. I never went into an exam thinking, how can I give this person the lowest band score? Never. I was always thinking, how can I give this person the highest band score? Many examiners are teachers, and as teachers we know that, you know, in order to perform well you need encouragement, you need to be put at ease, etc. We're all trained in those kinds of skills, and we take these with us into the examination room. Okay, in the examination room we're wearing a different hat, and that hat tells us that we have to be a little remote, we have to be a little detached, because we are assessing. But there is still a certain amount of skill in there that tries to encourage. Now, examiners are restricted from behaving like a teacher. But they will try through body language to encourage you and put you at ease as far as they're able. So examiners are not ogres. They are there to assess you, and they are not expecting anything. So they're not expecting any particular answers when they give you the questions. When I was an examiner, I would deliver the question. I had absolutely no idea what the answer was going to be, and nor should I have had. All I want is a good answer expressed in good English, which is interesting and which is communicative. So there are no hidden agendas here. The examiner answers the question but is quite open to whatever answer you give them. And I think it's important to realize that, because the examiner is not a person that you should be fearful of or that you should be worried about. And people say, well, what does the examiner want? The examiner doesn't want anything except for a good answer which communicates well and is delivered with good vocabulary, good pronunciation, and is a sensible answer to the question that they have asked you. And that means that in the speaking exam, your listening and your listening skills are just as important as your speaking skills. So you have to listen carefully to the question so that you can provide a sensible, communicative answer in good English. And that's your job. Okay. Now, this is the part of the exam in which you have the most control. In the listening, you have no idea what questions are going to come. It depends upon your skills, how well you do. The same is true of the reading. You have no idea about what the passages are going to be or what kinds of questions you're going to have, but you rely on your skills. In the writing, you have some control because you have the language in your head that you need to use to get the writing out. But in the speaking, you have even more control because everything comes from you. You can practice this. You can practice the format. You can practice the types of answers that you'll give to a whole range of questions. You create the answers. The examiner gives you the prompt, but the answers must come from you. So whatever you say, you have control over. You can choose what you want to say. Nobody's telling you how to answer a question. That's completely your choice. And very important, you decide how much or how little you want to speak. Remember, in this whole speaking test, you have about 14 minutes. And you need to maximize that time. You need to give your best performance. You need to say to the examiner, look at me, I'm band 7. This is what I can do. Now, if all of that is in your head and it doesn't come out of your mouth, then the examiner can do nothing to help you get your band 7. The examiner can only mark what you give them. And I've been in situations where a student has not delivered, where their part 2 was maybe just a minute, where all of their answers were too short. Yet from the answers, I could sense that this student was actually probably a band 7 student. But because they didn't give me any band 7 information or not enough band 7, I couldn't give them a band 7 score. So you have to demonstrate your language fully to the examiner, or they cannot give you a band 7 score. So the amount you give them is important. That doesn't mean you set off and you just speak non-stop, because that's not communication. And the key here is communication. Okay. So that's why you're in control, because everything the examiner gets from you comes from you. And it's up to you to give them what they want and as much of what they need to give you the high score that you're looking for. Okay, in part 2, you have the most control, so to speak, because you're speaking for 2 minutes and the examiner is not speaking at all. So that's one place in the exam where you can really demonstrate what you can do. You're not listening for any questions. You're not wondering about how to express your opinion. Here you have everything on a card, so you have a little time to prepare it, so you have the most control. So really focus on part 2 and make sure that this is where you deliver your best performance. So first of all, use the planning time well. You're given that. Don't say, oh, I'll just start straight away. You're given that time for a reason, because this is a mini speech. Now, if I were giving a speech like I'm giving this to you today, I've spent probably an hour preparing this. Now, I could stand up and do 2 minutes because I'm a native speaker, but if I were doing something more in detail, I would never stand up without preparing it. So they give you the time to prepare. Use that time well. Maximize the time you have. That means you've got 2 minutes. Use the 2 minutes. Don't dry up after a minute and 20 seconds. Try and use the 2 minutes. Try and get a sense in your practice of how long 2 minutes is. Because if you can deliver a beginning, a middle, and an end, and be within the 2 minutes, then that's going to be a really nicely rounded little talk. Don't worry if you can't, because the examiner stops you, and it's not a problem if they stop you. It's fine. But if you don't use the time, then the examiner has less to assess. And then this is really important. This is part of your planning. You want to tell a story or make a vivid description. So you have ideas about this, and in your planning, try and organize them. The card that you're given is organized in a way that you can deliver a short talk with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so use that format. You don't have to, it's not compulsory, but you have to think to yourself, why am I being given this card in this format? Why am I being given a minute to plan it? That's because this helps you to make the best of the talk that you can. So you have planning time, you have some points to organize your ideas, so then you'll come up with something that flows well. Everything in IELTS is done for a reason. It's not random. And you have to think, if I'm being given it this way, that's because this is the best way to do it. And so go with it and use the tools that you're given to help you make the best part 2 talk that you can. Have a picture in your head. When I'm working with students, I find this very powerful for the part 2. So if you're asked to describe something that happened, try and have the picture in your head of what happened. Who was there? Where did you go? What did you do? When did it happen? What was the weather like? If you were going on a journey, did anything happen on the journey? If you're asked to describe something, think about the description. What does it look like? What is in the place? Are there any dates around it? When did it happen? Think about the details. Interesting. Because the examiner is listening to what you say. They really are. And if you make it interesting, that means you're going to be using a certain type of vocabulary, like lots of adjectives, like animated words that are going to make your story interesting. And if the examiner finds your story interesting, then they're going to be engaged in it and they're going to give you a good mark at the end because you've delivered something that is interesting and well expressed. Okay, so let's go through the parts of the test. So the first thing that you have to do is prepare. And you're given a minute, you're given paper and a pencil to do this. Think about the topic. Can you find something that really happened? It's so much easier to explain something that really happened. So if you can, so if that is something that you did, somewhere that you went, if it's something that you've received or some object that you're asked to describe, try as far as possible to make it real. Now, I've worked with students who've invented stories and done very well, but it is much, much more difficult to do that because you won't have the detail. So have a story or an object or a time or a place in your head as you describe it, and then put down the notes. So write the main details, but put in a few smaller details. So quite often at the end of a practice, when I'm working with students, I'll say, you didn't give me the names of the people that were with you. You could have added a few more seconds by telling me their names, or you didn't tell me when this happened. So one or two little details help to put it in a place and make it more interesting. Use the points on your card. Go through them in order. That's why they're there, to help you plan it quickly and effectively. So don't ignore them. You don't have to use all of them if you don't want to, but to be honest, if you want to get 2 minutes out of this and you want a good structure, then there is your plan. Follow the points. Okay, now we come on to the performance. So tell the examiner about this as it happened, as if you were explaining it to somebody else. So perhaps you're telling a friend or someone in your family or a colleague at work. And just imagine that the examiner is this person. It helps you to forget that they are the examiner. And in that way, you'll have perhaps a more relaxed delivery, and you may be able to perform it with more animation or more interest. Because if you're thinking, oh, this is an exam, you're going to be a little bit lacking in confidence or a little bit less confident when you deliver. Okay, I've said this before. Make it interesting, tell the story, describe the scene, try and have a picture in your head, go through it step by step, give some little important or interesting details. Because examiners are interested in this as well. They're not just doing it as an assessment. Certainly the examiners I know. You know, they'll be interested in what you're telling them. And the more interesting you make it, the more they'll enjoy it. I know that sounds a strange word to use, enjoy. But believe you me, I've been in IELTS exams where I've been very interested, and what the students have told me has been enjoyable because I've learnt something about perhaps another country that I didn't know before. So don't think this is just an exercise. Try and treat it as a communication, a conversation. Put your focus on the story about what happened and when it happened and who was there, etc. Don't put the story just on the language. Because if you do that, you'll find that you're focusing too much on vocabulary and grammar. And that has an impact that we'll look at now. So, first of all, it's a given. If you want to get Band 7 and 8, you will have to use Band 7 and 8 language. Now, if you don't use Band 7 and 8 language, you're not going to get Band 7 and 8. I know that you know the language for Band 7 and 8. But if you only focus on that language, then you're not going to be focused on the story or on the description. And what will happen is you'll become less fluent. You have to be fluent. And fluency counts more. When I'm teaching students, if we are doing a grammar exercise, I will be very, very keen that that is accurate. So in the writing, for example, you have to be accurate. You mustn't make grammatical errors. Speaking is different. If you're speaking, the most important thing is the communication. So when I'm working with students on communication, I will not correct every grammar mistake, because if I do, that keeps stopping the student from speaking and the communication is lost. So conversely, if you're in the exam and you're focusing only on whether you're using complex sentences, whether you're using modal verbs, whether you're using good vocabulary, whether you're using good agreement and articles, if you're thinking about all those grammatical things, then you are not going to be fluent, and therefore you are not going to communicate. And this is an exam about communication. So there has to be a balance between the good language for Band 7 and 8 and the fluency of good communication. So the most important thing is that you communicate. That's what you've been tested on. Okay, so communication mustn't suffer. A few errors is not a big problem. Lots and lots of errors, obviously, that comes in the band descriptors. If you look at the band descriptors for the speaking, you'll look at band 7 and 8 and you'll see that the tolerance for grammatical error is quite low, but the examiner will not be worried if you make a few grammatical errors, so long as they can understand what you're saying and so long as the communication is good. So don't focus on the language, focus on the story or on the description or on whatever it is you're asked to speak about. If you focus on the story, and this has been proven many, many times when I work with students, where the student is focused on the story and engrossed in the story, the language just comes naturally. Okay, you may have a couple of words that you really want to use, and in the story, as you're telling it, those words don't come. That doesn't matter. If you're really focused on what you want to say, then the language that you have in your memory will come out. If it doesn't, and if you're struggling with the language and you're not getting the band 7 and 8 language when you do this, then my suggestion is that your language is perhaps not yet there and you need to improve your overall speaking skills before you attempt to get a 7 or 8 at the IELTS. You should be doing this anyway. But if you can't focus on the communication and allow the language to flow, then maybe you need to go back and do some more speaking practice, just general speaking practice. Okay. So here are some tips on how to deliver a good band part 2 in the speaking exam. I find when I'm working with students that if you say 3 things about each of the bullet points with a nice little introduction of the topic, frame your topic, always frame it, always say the journey I'm going to tell you about or the object I want to describe is. Always frame it with a little introduction. Then about 3 things per point on the card usually comes out at around 2 minutes. Now don't be rigorous about this because you may think, oh, well, I can't say 2 things there, but I could say 4 things there. But this is just a kind of average that I found with working on part 2. So roughly, but you know if you only say 1 thing about each point, you're not going to get 2 minutes. And if you try and say 5 or 6 things about each point, you're going to go over. And it's very frustrating sometimes when I'm working with students when it takes them a little while to get going and they get going just as I have to stop them. So it's really important that you get in straight away at the beginning, which is why you should frame it with a little introduction. So the story I'm going to tell you about is, and it happened, and the date. So a little introduction, then 3 things, and you should have your 2 minutes. Okay, one thing you can do to prepare yourself for this is to just speak for 1 minute non-stop on a random topic. Now, one thing I tell my students to do is just write down some topics on pieces of paper, fold them up and put them in a glass or a cup and keep them somewhere on your desk or somewhere in your house or in your office. And then when you have a little bit of time, say a couple of minutes free, you're not doing anything, pick one out and just speak straight away without preparation for 1 minute and see how far you can get. And then as you get good at that, then increase that to 2 minutes. So this is just a way of improving your fluency. And you'll find that without the preparation, you just come out with random things, but it doesn't matter. It helps you to organize the ideas quickly in your head. So this little exercise is very useful. When you actually do the exam, of course, you're going to have preparation as well. So you should be able to do it with a better level of communication. Just for fluency, this is useful. Right, do record yourself. Record yourself practicing a part 2. Listen to it, be critical, record it again. Times as you need to record it until you are satisfied that this is around band 7 or band 8. And then you'll first one with your last one. I've done this a lot with students, and I've asked them to send me their recordings, and I have noticed improvement from the first one they've done to the final one. So don't just record it once. Listen and say, okay, I don't think that could be better, and record on until you're happy with your recording. And then choose another one and go through the same process. It works very well. You can hear your pronunciation, you can hear your errors, you can hear how fluent you are if you hesitate, you can hear if the ideas are organized, and you can hear your vocabulary, etc. So it's a really, really good exercise to try. And yes, the more you practice it, the better you'll become. I can guarantee that because I've seen it happen over and over and over with students. Okay, so those are my top tips for so let's just recap. So to get success in speaking part 2, this is what we need to do. First of all, try and imagine the story as it happened. If it's a real story, it will be a lot easier. If it isn't a real story, try to anchor it to something. So perhaps somebody else's story that you've heard, or it could perhaps be a film. Maybe if there's a film and there's something you saw in the film that would fit this card that you've been given, then you could do that. So try and have something in your head as you speak. It helps you to organize the ideas. So say around 3 things per point on the card, and that should give you, you know, about 2 minutes. And do plan a little closing when you do your 1-minute preparation. So plan a little final sentence. So that's why da 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 da, something like that. Focus on the story or the event or the description. Don't focus on the language. Even writing down some words that you want to include will distract you from the story. And it's much easier to communicate well when you're telling the story and not thinking about the language. Make it interesting. The more interesting it is, the more good language will come out, and the more the examiner will be engaged. And if they're engaged and you're communicating well with them, then you're going to get a higher score. Okay, try and imagine it's not the examiner. Try and imagine that you're just explaining this to this person who is a colleague, a friend, somebody on the bus, but it's not an exam situation. I know that's difficult because you will be in the exam, but explain it as if you would explain it to one of those people. And finally, if you're finding that the language isn't flowing naturally when you start to speak, work on your language. Now, the best way of doing that is to find people to speak to. So try and find people with whom you can speak on a regular basis about, not necessarily about IELTS, it could be about IELTS, but it could be about other things too. So try and get as much speaking practice as you can, because speaking regularly improves fluency, improves communication, improves vocabulary recall, improves language recall, which means that all the language that you're learning, which is in your memory, the more you practice getting it out through your mouth, the better your recall of that language will be when you're in the exam. And then you won't be in a situation where you're searching for words. That makes you hesitate, that makes the communication collapse. So work on your language constantly by practicing with other people. That doesn't have to be native speakers, it can be anybody, preferably somebody who is at around the same level that you are. But it does not have to be teachers, it could be friends, family, colleagues, or find partners on Skype. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say today about speaking part 2. Now, I've only got time, obviously, to share just a very tiny fraction of the tips and techniques and support that I normally give to my students. So there's not enough time to share a great deal with you, and there is an awful lot more to share. The speaking part too, in my experience, is one part of the speaking where students quite often do not maximize their ability. And so it's important to practice this to maximize your ability and not risk losing points in this area. Because it's not a difficult thing to do. Like all of IELTS, it's very straightforward. If you fulfill the descriptors, you will get the band 7 or the band 8. But you have to be able to fulfill the descriptors and you have to be able to perform well. And there are a lot of pitfalls in IELTS because perhaps people don't have all the techniques or because you don't practice enough, etc. So that can cause you not to get the score that you want. So it's really important that you address this, because if you don't address this, then three things will happen, and these three things will cause you to lose. First of all, you'll lose money because you'll have to take the exam again. And I have had students who've taken the exam up to 20 and 25 times. And if you add that money up, that is an awful lot of money that's been lost. Worse than the loss of money, I think, for many students, and I'm sure some of you here today are thinking this, is the loss of time. If you have to postpone your master's degree or your PhD for another year, you've lost 12 months. If you have to postpone your move to another country for another year, you know, you've lost that opportunity. So in order not to lose time, because the money will come back to you once you get the dream job you're looking for, the money will come back to you, but the time never will. So a time loss is a much bigger loss. And the final loss is a loss of confidence, because the longer that you take to do this and to get the score that you want, the easier it is to lose confidence. And if you lose confidence and your scores begin to, in some cases, deteriorate or get stuck and not move forward, then that becomes stressful. And we all know that high levels of stress can have an impact on health, and that's not good. So if you don't get this sorted, then you can lose quite a lot by trying and trying to get this exam. So it's really, really important that you get the right advice and the right help to get you your scores and allow you to move on with the future that you're dreaming about, that you've planned for yourself, and in many cases, I know, for your family. So that's why I really want to support you in this and help you to get to the scores that you really want or you're really asked for in order to move on with this new future. And I have to say that the students I work with, 80% of them over the last 2 years have got the score. In fact, most of them have got higher than the score that they really wanted, using the tips and techniques that I have to offer, one of which I've shown you, or a couple of which I've shown you here today. And I've put all the knowledge that I have into a program which I've developed. It's an online program, and it's called the IELTS Success System. And this will give you everything you need to know, all the techniques, all the tips, all the advice that I give to all my students that work with me, whether in groups or one-to-one, and the same kind of advice I've been given to students for the last 20 years. And I've put it all into this program. So in this program, you will get 300 hours of IELTS exercises and IELTS information. It's a 12-week course. You get an email lesson every day, which takes you to the lesson of the day, and that will deal with one aspect of the exam. So for example, if we're looking at reading, it will deal with maybe yes, no, not given. And each of these lessons gives you not only the tips and techniques, but also practical exercises that you can practice and check to make sure that you've understood how to tackle this kind of question. You also get membership of an online community. Now, this community is a private Facebook community where you can ask questions, liaise with other people at the same level. Remember, all of my students are looking for Band 7 and 8. You can also post your writing, which will get feedback from myself, another teacher, and also from the other people within the community. Many of the students post useful things that they find in other sites online as well. And as part of that, there's also Skype groups going on where you can hook up with other people on this program to practice your speaking, the sort of thing I've been talking about today. You also get a couple of bonuses. So firstly, there are some corrected essays that I have done from previous students who've now gone and are living in Australia or the UK and following their dream. And I give you a small batch of those essays so you can look at the kinds of things that students do that stops them getting Band 7 and the kind of advice that I give to help you to make sure that you do get Band 7 or 8. You also get 1 year's membership to my online English language learning site, which is called Gap Fillers. Now, Gap Fillers hosts this program, but it also has over 8,000 pages of exercises in listening, speaking, reading, grammar, vocabulary, and many other things to help you improve your English language skills. The program is self-paced. That means you can do it in your own time. For much of it, you have the answers straight away, so you can check those yourself. But you can email or post messages anytime if there's anything that you're not sure about or need help with. But the whole program is available right from the first day. So if you want to work faster and you have more time and you want to do more lessons in a day, then you can do it a lot faster and get it finished in less than 12 weeks. And the final thing is that if you take this course, then you can also get a 20% discount on any other one-to-one training that you might want to do in the future with myself or any of my IELTS trainers. So it represents really good value for money. And because you've made the time to come to this today, I want to help you and do something very special for you. So normally this program would be $197, but because you're here today, and I really believe that with the support that I can give you, you can get your Band 7 and 8. I'm going to offer this to you for just $97 if you go ahead and buy it in the next 3 days. So in the next 72 hours, for everybody who's made the time to come on this call, I'm offering you this whole program plus all the bonuses, etc., for just $97. Now remember, if you don't get the right advice and support, it can slow you down. Doing this by yourself takes time. I've been teaching IELTS for 20 years. I've been teaching English language for about 36 years, so I know how long it takes to improve scores. The British Council say to improve from one band to the next band will take you a year. That's doing it completely by yourself. If you get good advice, good support, you can cut that time by probably 2/3. So it's really important that you don't lose time, lose money, and lose confidence. So this is a good offer for you to take up. And for $97, it is a lot of content, all of it IELTS, and there's an awful lot of support there. And many of my students have said that the best thing about this program is the extra support they get through the Facebook group and through the Skype group. So this is a key to making sure that you get that high band that you are looking for. So remember, you have 3 days, and we will keep the price at $97 for the 3 days. And to sign up, I forgot to give you the the site, I'm sorry. It's on the screen here, but it's www.ieltslearningtips.com/IELTS Success System. Again, www.ieltslearningtips.com/IELTS-success-system, and it's right there on the screen. So you may be able to click through. If not, then you can just copy that down and go straight to the site where you can find this special offer for the next 72 hours. If you need any help with that, then you're very welcome just to drop an email or post a comment underneath this video. So, to go back to the speaking, remember the things that I told you about before. Make sure that you use the planning. Make sure that you focus on the communication and not the language. Make it interesting. Try and imagine you're telling somebody you know. And if your language isn't flowing, go back and practice your language skills. So I'm just going to come back to the main screen. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much again for coming. I hope that that will help you with your part 2. Don't forget to click through, and I would love to see you on the IELTS Success System. And remember, you have 72 hours, 3 days to take advantage of that special offer. And I look forward to seeing some of you in the Facebook group and on the program itself. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.